welcome to the show. My name's Dan, this is Exploder, and I'm back with another episode just for you. It's kind of weird to see myself on camera like this. It's usually an audio situation. I'm sorry for what you're viewing. Anyway, in pro wrestling, there's a lot of things going on, but here's a special episode. Not only is it on video, but I also, for only the fourth time I think I've ever done this, I have a guest, a very special guest on. I have Jake, who has his own podcast. Jake, say hi to the people.
What's up? What's up? I'm so glad to be here.
And Jake, just a little bit, what's your podcast about?
Yes, I run a podcast that hopefully people that are here listening have come from my podcast since you were on the other day, but I have a podcast called Something About Sports. In the most simplest way, it is a podcast for people that don't necessarily maybe watch sports, but we have times in our lives where everyone's sitting around talking about sports. So we're there to just give you that little bit of information that if people are talking something about sports, you can talk, well, something about sports.
Exactly. See, like I said, he's on here and we're talking about wrestling. He is a wrestling fan, but he's also a sports fan. And I actually, though I know very little about sports, admittedly, I did do a guest appearance on his podcast, and we talked about things. One of the topics we talked about, which was sort of the beginning, the reason why I was on in the first place, was the recent developments with Pat McAfee, who is a former punter. Pat McAfee Bebe, as he created that T-shirt they are going to totally make. It was a former punter in the NFL who ends up being an announcer in wrestling, which is a weird transition, and is now apparently going to have a match with Adam Cole.
No, I guess it's not necessarily such the weirdest thing because Pat McAfee, even when he was in sports, and he also has his own podcast, he's always kind of just been an arrogant prick. So it actually is, a very smooth, like, oh, we're just going to also make you physical, which, he's an athlete.
Yeah. Well, so, the reason I say that is, they're right here, the Pat McAfee show. And I've seen this kind of stuff, and he's had some, even not a sports fan, I've actually seen some clips that are very interesting, the stuff he does.
Oh, dude, he's hilarious.
Conversation with him and Adam Cole it's wrestling, so it's very scripted. But it came off real enough, like I'll say.
Because Adam Cole is somebody that he's so good at being Adam Cole.
Yes.
That you would believe that he would get into a scuffle with somebody for simply talking the things that he was sick of people saying about him. Who, you're talking your dirt sheets and everything.
He's very good and very talented. My thing with Pat McAfee, and he's younger, so this reference is a little old, but I'm gonna sort of date myself on the last time I actually paid attention to any real sport. I used to be a Cowboys fan back when that used to mean something. And
sorry about our episode 2 episodes ago.
Well, let's see, Cowboys. I remember the Cowboys from like Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, Deion Sanders.
Back in the hookers and cocaine days.
the hookers and cocaine. Back when their coach was caught in an airport with a loaded handgun. Those days. Well, okay, currently, Troy Aikman is, I don't know if he's still there, but I know Troy Aikman for a while there was doing announcing for Fox.
Mm-hmm.
He was an announcer. Well, he retired from football, went into announcing. That's the normal thing they do in every sport. To me, and although Pat McAfee's younger, so it's a little different, but to me, this is like a kind of thing where a guy does what he does, like a sport, and then he retires, and then he goes into something else. But my thing is, like, to me, this is almost like if Troy Aikman decided he was going to jump back on the field.
Oh, this is him training.
Yeah, this is him training. And he's a very athletic guy. I'm not saying he's not.
Dude.
But that's me. So to me, it's like, okay, you can be an athletic guy. And there's going to be a little leeway. Because anytime you have an athlete coming from another sport into wrestling, there's a little leeway. They're not going to be great. Gronkowski was never going to be great. He was passable. Steve McMichael wasn't great, but he did what he needed to do for who he was.
He was a full horseman, though.
He's not going to, like Pat McAfee's not going to have the best wrestling match in the world. All he has to do, honestly, is be passable. Anything above passable, a guy like Adam Cole can drag him to a good match.
Oh,
So nothing
especially.
that can be done. But he is a little bit of a buffer. He was an athlete, but that buffer is he wasn't a wrestler. He was a football player. Gronkowski was as charismatic as he wasn't a wrestler. So it's a
Yeah, but
different
I
skill.
guess one of the things though too is, I mean, in a athlete becoming wrestler, with how much he's apparently actually behind the scenes been training for a while, you kind
And that's
of gotta,
good.
I
I
mean,
think that
hope
shows a
that.
proper respect for the
Well, look at
business.
Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey
Yep.
is one that came from MMA to, I
Right.
mean, that 1 year. I mean, she
That 1 year.
looked like a legit wrestler.
Yeah.
I mean, she
And
main
that's good.
evented at WrestleMania, so.
I think what saves her is honestly, and I think there's a difference in people that do it, the crossover. The difference is whether or not they have a proper respect for the business and they actually like it, or if it's just something they do.
Yeah,
What I mean by that, when Ronda Rousey is a fan, there are clips online of her going to PWG shows. I mean, we're talking about someone who before WWE came along and offered her God knows what amount of money, she was at PWG shows just as a fan, just to watch. She's a fan. So she put that time training. Her MMA career was done. She was done. We all knew that. But it was one of the things where she transitioned, but she put herself into it and she used her mainstream appeal to add that credibility to the women's division as a whole. She put over Charlotte, she put over Becky Lynch. She did a lot of things, although
they
she
have
was
all become stars since then. I mean,
yeah, she was the star.
I still
I mean,
think
they
one
made
of
it about
the
her
coolest
for about a
scenes
year.
was the kneeing to the face, where they
Yeah.
did the breakup brawl, and she
Yeah.
kneed Charlotte in the face, or no, she got kneed in the face by Charlotte, and a lot of people kind of thought that shit was real because the way that her body went limp, they're like, oh
Yeah.
shit, that's not good.
But she, like I said, she led that legitimacy, but she used it like she used it that. And then there are the people. So I admire the people that actually go in and train. I sort of WCW had a thing about this, and I'm sort of all over the place, but this is sort of where I'm talking about. There's a difference in wrestling in the athletes that come in and sort of make an appearance and just sort of they use their athletic credentials to make an appearance and then they disappear like a one time. WrestleMania 2, the Battle Royal, they had a bunch of NFL guys. They had Refrigerator Perry in '86 coming off the '85 Bears.
Right,
That's a huge get.
that dude
But he
was
did Battle
huge.
Royal. He was a huge get, but it was a huge get to get. I mean, there were so many guys in that Battle Royal that were from the '85 Bears, but it was a one-time shot. It was, it was a Battle Royal. You know how hard it is to screw up a Battle Royal? Just go out when they tell you to. That's how hard it is.
Seen Impact Wrestling?
What?
Have you seen Impact Wrestling?
Well, yeah, they could screw up a wet dream, but that's beside the point.
Sorry, TNA. TNA technically was the train wreck.
Yeah,
Impact has actually been good, and Impact actually has a.
TNA's got a lot of. TNA's giving me like night terrors.
Yes,
Impact,
TNA, not
like,
Impact. TNA.
Yeah, Impact is it's different, but it's in a smaller building. But anyway, but then there's the thing between that, and then there's the people that actually come in and transfer, because there's a lot of guys. I mean, if you look at guys who the transfers are guys who come across, there aren't a lot of top level athletes in their field that turn over and come to wrestling. There are people that are good at what they do. They're okay. I mean, guys like Brian Pillman, Lex Luger, Wahoo McDaniel had football careers. Very few go for that. Bronco Nagurski is the first one I think of. He played in a Super Bowl and he was an NWA champion.
Nice.
That's huge. The transfer to that. But very few guys, they're like, Brian Pillman was good, played for the Bengals for a bit, but he's known for being a wrestler. So for a guy that comes over, right now, let's say, not going to happen, obviously, but let's say someone like LeBron James decides to try wrestling. He's never going to be as good at wrestling as he is at basketball. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
And
he is LeBron James. I mean,
he is, but it's a perception thing. It's like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan,
he defeated the Monstars.
Well, yes, clearly he saved the world, but he was probably okay at baseball, but he was so good at basketball.
No, he wasn't.
Well, I'm just saying, he might have been.
That man failed at the minor leagues.
Well, he was in the minor leagues, but I'm saying he was fighting an uphill battle. He was Michael Jordan. Unless this guy was in baseball, a first round Hall of Famer, there's nothing that was going to compare to his basketball career, period.
And what was worse for him, too, is not only that, plus his dad had been like an amazing baseball player.
Right.
So he was literally trying to climb up two hills at the same time.
You're fighting uphill. So what I'm saying is, with wrestlers, there are people that can come across. Ronda Rousey's probably in the modern day, probably the closest one. And I mentioned Steve McMichael. Steve McMichael came in 1995 as an announcer after retiring from the NFL years before. He came as a wrestler. Steve McMichael was not a good wrestler. He was not good. He had a great personality. He was charismatic. They made him a fucking horseman.
Right.
But he wasn't a great wrestler. He was a great football player, but he wasn't a great wrestler. Kevin Green.
I honestly, as a kid, I did not realize that he was actually a football player. I just honestly thought that was a gimmick until because
he was part of the '85 Bears, and so by the time we're growing up, he had been out of the NFL for years.
Yeah,
but he had that Super Bowl ring, and he was part of a legendary team. But as a wrestler, he wasn't great, but he was good enough. Yeah, right here.
I just thought that was a gimmick. I just thought it was a gimmick to put him in the jacket.
Right, but it's legit. That's legit. Wasn't a great wrestler, but he was a great football player. That transfers, Kevin Green. Kevin Green played for the NFL and wrestled for WCW a few times. Actively on the team when he was playing for the Panthers. Reggie White came in 1998. He came in for a match with Mongo for some damn reason.
Kevin Green played for my Rams. So
he played for the Rams. And there were guys who, like I said, there were guys who played before, like Bill Goldberg, played for the Falcons, played for the Rams. Wasn't a main level guy, did better in wrestling. But the guys who go from main top level professional football player, baseball, basketball, whatever, and a top level wrestler, they're few and far between. And MMA is probably the biggest crossover. But like I said, outside of Rousey, I don't know of many. I mean, Tank Abbott had a cup of coffee in WCW, but he wasn't a great MMA fighter, let alone a great wrestler.
I say the only one I can think of is like that weird Cain Velasquez that was in for a match.
2 minutes. They made it seem like he was a monster, and he did 2 minutes. Oh yeah, Brock Lesnar. Here's another one. Brock Lesnar decided to do it backwards. How did that work out for you?
Yeah.
For a guy who wrestled his entire life and then decided, I want to play football. Yeah, let's go to the Vikings. Let's try and get on the squad right out of wrestling. It worked out for him. He got cut,
so he decided to go be an MMA fighter.
Yeah, and he did what? And you know what? That's the thing. He did the opposite. Then he went to MMA, did pretty well for himself. Admittedly, I was waiting for him to fail miserably. But you know what? He did pretty well for himself. Admittedly.
I still think one of my favorite moments with Brock Lesnar in MMA was after a title retention, or when he won the title. One of MMA's main sponsors is Bud Light.
This was 100.
His comment was, "I'm gonna go drink some Coors Light and bang my wife," and you're like
and he had to apologize because Dana White pulled him into the showers between the two and ripped his ass, and he had to apologize at the press conference after it.
The best part is he had to apologize to Bud Light while he turns the cap, but yet Dana White does not have any problems with him uttering the lines, "I'm going to go bang my wife." He's like, you don't have to apologize for that.
Dana White says the F word on national television, you don't give a shit. That was the thing with the sponsor.
Coors Light, because Bud Light was pissed.
But also, and then we're talking about wrestlers. There are wrestlers that come in and do an appearance, and oddly enough, I thought about this the other day, which bothered me. WrestleMania 11 was main evented, of course, by Bam Bam Bigelow.
Yeah.
Versus Lawrence Taylor, who had just come off the Giants, legendary career, a little bit of a cocaine problem, let's admit it.
A little bit. I mean, in the sense of Seattle has a rain problem.
But I thought about it, and what got me was Lawrence Taylor has main evented WrestleMania. Jerry Lawler hasn't. They both had the same amount of WrestleMania matches. Think about that. Jerry Lawler wrestled once. He wrestled once against Michael Cole. It went forever. I think people aged and died during the match. Lawrence Taylor also had one WrestleMania match, and it was in the main event. Yeah, look at this. This was people do not understand. The WWF in 1995 was in a swirl. Anyone who knows wrestling back then knows it was a death spiral at this time. They put so much promotion into this. They put out T-shirts. They put out foam fingers. They had press conferences. This was the
like
big
all over the place too. Like they did more for this than Conor McGregor did.
They had Salt and Pepper play him to the ring with a "What a Man," and it was this big deal. 5 minutes into this match, Lawrence Taylor is sucking wind like you would not believe for a guy who had just come off an NFL career.
Yeah, but that's a different kind of conditioning, though. You get to take more breaks in football.
Yeah, a lot more breaks. Yeah, Bam Bam Bigelow ran him around and protected him and did well and sold every dumb forearm that man did. Because Lawrence Taylor was big for doing forearms and they looked like shit. But Bam Bam Bigelow did the job, protected him, made more money in that match than he probably ever did the rest of his life.
Probably.
Yeah, and this was 1995.
That's still looked at as one of the most memorable main events in WrestleMania history.
Memorable because of the spectacle. It wasn't a good match. If you just watched the match and it was, it's Bam Bam. Bam Bam versus X, whoever the hell, and if it was that match, wouldn't be that great. It was literally considered what it was because it was Lawrence Taylor and because he had that connection, because he had just came out of the NFL. I don't know his career stats, but I know he was a season or two
Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he had just come off the field. I mean, he had been, because what was the Theismann thing? The Joe Theismann thing, that was what, 92, 93? When he snapped his leg on Monday Night Football. That was early 90s. That was not that far from this match. You know, so he was notorious and all these things. WB had the thing at this time, especially in the early 90s, they would bring in these athletes, but they were bringing in people. This was the first guy they were getting that was like right off the presses. They were bringing people in that were a little past their prime, let's say. Not to say they weren't good, but like they brought in, I remember 94, they brought in Walter Payton. And he managed Razor Ramon. And that's the one that famously Shawn Michaels talked about how in his head he thought he could outrun Walter Payton. Which is the funniest. Even he looks back and goes, that was a dumb thing to think.
Yeah.
Because he wanted Walter Payton to chase him around the ring. And like they would do stuff like that. And then every once in a while, remember when they do Raw and they would show some random and I don't know boxing, but they'd show some random boxer in the front row. I remember they brought in Thomas Hearns, Thomas Hitman Hearns. Yeah. And they only brought him in because his nickname was Hitman and Bret Hart was there.
Oh, nice.
That was why they brought him in, because of the nickname.
Mm-hmm.
Half the crowd didn't know no disrespect, but no one knew who Thomas Hearns was. The big one, and this is again to the Attitude Era, the big one that did it for them was Mike Tyson.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one because at that time he was, the baddest man on the planet.
And just came off of biting Holyfield's ear. He couldn't box. He wasn't allowed.
That was during his suspension.
He was suspended for a year. That's why they couldn't let him. He couldn't allow him in the ring. Like that's why they wanted him to wrestle. He couldn't wrestle. He wasn't allowed to do anything physical for that year.
Vegas and New Jersey would not sign licenses, which a lot of people may not know. You have to, if either Vegas or New Jersey basically says we won't allow you, they're who control. If they say no, usually the other one will also say no, and you aren't allowed. It's not like, oh, you have to go down to the minor. You're not. If you box,
well, Tyson's thing was he was doing at that time every fight he was doing was running out of Vegas. So the Nevada Athletic Commission barred him for a year. That's where he was fighting out of. Yeah, they were fighting in casinos in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So, but here's the thing: we were pretty young at this time. I mean, I knew this retroactively, but this was not the first time the WF actually had tried to get a hold of Mike Tyson.
No, they had been for years, especially when he was younger.
They tried to book him in 1990 when he was ripping everyone in 90 seconds.
Yeah, I'll mention that he's actually going to be a future episode of something about sports with him making a comeback. I'm going to do a special episode just on him because he's freaking Mike Tyson.
That's going to be great. Seriously, be sure to check that out. That's going to be awesome. Anyone who's watching this, That's going to be Mike Tyson has one hell of a career, literally from the 80s
And
up
it's
through his.
over.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Well, he had a career from the 80s, and then he had his run in the 90s. He had his early 90s, he had his late 90s, and then he had his run in the early 2000s. And now, like I said, now he's coming back for this. So that's gonna be a heck of that's a topic on its own. That's amazing.
I'm so excited for an exhibition fight that is
Yeah.
probably gonna have more pay-per-views than most
Right.
current boxing even does.
But do you remember the one in 1990, the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They booked him. He was going to be the referee between a Saturday Night's Main Event between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage.
Yeah.
They're going to do it. He goes to Japan,
Mhm.
and he loses to Buster Douglas.
Yeah.
What is
And then they just
greatest upset in the history of ever.
Down goes Tyson.
So beats Tyson. At this time, no one got past Tyson past the first round.
Correct.
So this was a huge upset. So so Mike Tyson called back, and basically he doesn't want to do Saturday Night's Main Event now.
Yeah.
So what did WWE do? They go to Buster Douglas.
Yeah.
He's the world champion. They get Buster Douglas on Saturday Night's Main Event. Yeah, there's Hulk Hogan and Buster Douglas. No one knows who the hell James Buster Douglas is. They just know he's the guy who beat Tyson.
Down goes Tyson.
And the thing about it was, as great as this was, the minute he got back in the ring with Tyson, Tyson ate and devoured his soul.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this wasn't a great movie moment. This is the guy died at the end.
Yeah, Tyson was pissed.
Yes.
Tyson said they're training as if this man had done bad things to his family. He was pissed.
So then Tyson goes, and then Tyson goes he goes to prison, he gets out of prison, and then he spends about 4 years destroyed. I mean, this is a guy who, like I said, this was a stretch where he didn't have matches that left 90 seconds.
Yeah.
He beat Leon Spinks in 95 seconds?
He told a person in an interview, they asked him about why he was in such great shape. He said, because all I got to do while I was in prison was work out and punch the wall.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what he did. He sat there and punched the wall. Yeah. So hitting a person was like, oh, this is easy.
So Mike Tyson, so he comes in, and so WWE did get him. Eric Bischoff said when he found out that WWF had got Tyson, he knew that's when they were in trouble.
Yeah.
Because the press that was coming for them. And they're right. And really what they paid him to do, he made 4 appearances that whole run. He did a couple things in the ring. He did the Austin thing, he did the DX thing, he did the workout, and he did the WrestleMania match where he did almost nothing.
That was one of my first WrestleManias that I got to stay up and watch.
Yeah, that mainstream exposure meant so much, because when you had Steve Austin in the ring with Mike Tyson, who was such a big deal at the time, there was nothing like it. Mike Tyson had just come off biting a man's ear, Steve Austin flips him off.
Well, and that was one of those, when they had that moment at WrestleMania, that was kind of a cool one, because it was like the baddest man on the planet in ring with, the biggest SOB or whatever they called it. That was honestly I'm pretty sure that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Yes. Because it was just such a big, coolest thing in the media at the time.
And some of these appearances, they're done for a very specific purpose. This right here was done. This was one of the things where I think WWF understood how things translated and how things were viewed. Because when they did this, they knew this was going to be on SportsCenter.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Austin in the ring with Mike Tyson is going to be on SportsCenter. WCW, on the other hand, they decided, I've got an idea. Let's put the world title on David Arquette. Because they thought it was an equal thing. They thought it was going to get the same reaction. It didn't. Because WWE understands if you're with Mike Tyson. Now, to be fair, in 1998, if Steve Austin was in the ring with Buster Douglas, who would have given a shit? I mean, really. It had to be Tyson. It had to be literally the hottest. And they I don't know what they paid him, but I guarantee it ended with the word million.
Oh, I can almost guarantee.
But it was worth it, because the exposure that guy
didn't do things unless it was for $1 million.
and that's what I mean. So that kind of thing, when you're talking about a guy who's like, and this guy comes off the Holyfield thing, so people just want to see what this guy's going to do. Then you put him in the ring with Steve Austin, even for that segment. I mean, again, it was a push apart, it was a pull apart.
Right.
He flipped him off. They separated him. That was it. But that alone was a huge mainstream bump, and that's what that did. Mike Tyson gave the bump to Steve Austin. Is this Dave? Oh my God! Is this David Arquette?
Oh God!
Did I give? First of all, I'll give just a little aside here. I will give David Arquette all the credit in the world for still doing this. He was, he's not just a guy who came in and got 5 seconds of fame and got the hell out. He's doing that. I mean, he's doing this on lower level shows. He's working. He's trying. I'll give him all the credit in the world for at least trying it. So
he's got a documentary or a movie or something coming out.
Yeah, like the world title.
Nobody Can Kill David Arquette or something like that.
Yeah, the Ready to Rumble is a war crime. The world title was probably worse.
I love that
but
movie.
I'll give him the world for actually still doing this, because clearly he wants to do this. Because if he was doing it for fame, he'd be calling WB up trying to get a guest spot. But he's just doing it on these little shows, and so I'll give him all the credit in the world. So this is not a knock on him personally, but there is a disparity between the WWF using Mike Tyson and WCW thinking David Arquette was an A-lister. I'm just saying.
Well, and here's the thing too, that like a lot of people make fun of the David Arquette winning the title and everything, but it was also a lot of it goes on WCW for how they booked it. They booked him like a dummy, treated him like a dummy, and then had him drop the title like a dummy. Part of it goes to WCW for just not. I mean, you could easily have had him, win the title and then the next week be like, I know that, and drop it or something. But they made him look like a dummy.
And to his credit, I will say this: to his credit, he didn't want to win the belt.
No,
he was. Everything I've read, he wanted nothing to do with it. He knew it was a dumb idea. He had too much respect for it. He knew it was a bad idea.
He knew how they were going to treat him.
Because he's not a wrestler. He knows he's not a wrestler. He was, at that time, he was doing C-level movies. He was really known because he was married to someone who was on the Friends cast.
Courtney Cox.
And he knew he wasn't a wrestler. I mean, the Slamboree where they took the belt off him and put it on Jeff Jarrett with that another swerve for the sake of a swerve. Remember that outfit he wore? It was like a devil costume or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
It was so ridiculous. You knew what he was doing. So, again, I'll give him credit. Just a little side. I'll give him all the credit in the world for still doing it. But there's a difference between when you use a celebrity or an athlete right and when you're just throwing them on there because you think it'll get you views. And that it's a fine line. But if you don't do it, you end up with things like David Arquette winning the world title. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm looking at these things right now. I'm looking at these different things. WrestleMania has usually been the big one. That's where they usually bring in like all the athletes. WWE's had these moments where they will, Gronkowski has been on WrestleMania how many times now? He did the crowd spot. He did
which is honestly probably one of the funniest things because they didn't tell the security guards that he was going to the thing to run in the ring. So and now mind you, bless her heart for doing her damn job well, because she tries to stop him and tackles him to the ground to stop him, and before somebody runs over to tell her, hey, he's supposed to be doing that.
And then his second appearance is after he signed a long-term deal where he was the host of WrestleMania of the Caribbean, and he won the 24/7 title at one point or something. It was just
the second night.
It was just weird. Like I said, he's a charismatic guy, and I'll give him all the credit in the world. But this was a very short crossover that was just weird. I got what they were doing.
He decided to go back to the NFL because
so his long-term deal ended up being what, 6 months or whatever the hell it was. I mean, they're like, "Oh, we're going to the NFL." They're like, "Okay."
It was about a month and a half.
Come on. It was like Dave Bautista when Dave Bautista came back that one time. They're like, "Oh, he signed for 2 years." Bullshit. He didn't sign for 2 years. He was gone in 4 months. Shut up.
Right.
I'm looking at these things here, and like WrestleMania, like look, like all these random people that are WrestleMania. I mean, some of these I knew and some of these I didn't. Ernie Holmes. Ernie Holmes was in the WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal. Used to be a defensive tackle for the Steelers. Ricky Jackson played for the Saints. He was the manager of Lawrence Taylor. I totally forgot that.
Oh, wow.
Ed Too Tall Jones. I actually do remember this. Ed Too Tall Jones used to play for the Cowboys back in the 80s. He was the guest referee at WrestleMania 2. Ed Too Tall Jones was a referee. Ed Too Tall Jones, even at the time, was bigger than half the WWE roster.
Right.
Ed Jones was a giant of a man. So that just makes me laugh. Tommy Lasorda was a guest ring announcer at WrestleMania 2. A lot of WrestleMania 2 stuff here. Billy Martin, I remember this. Billy Martin for the Yankees was a guest ring announcer, and there's still a debate on whether or not he was drunk. Yeah, Billy Martin had a little bit of a drinking problem, and they were like they literally brought him in just to do that one announcing spot, and people are wondering, they're like, yeah, he probably had a couple drinks before.
He couldn't do it. He was stumbling through, messing up people's weights and like all kinds of.
Yeah,
he couldn't read the cards.
Yeah. And then we're talking about a little bit about boxing. Okay. Matter of fact, first of all, before I get into that, I just noticed this, and I did know this, but I sort of forgot. When Lawrence Taylor is going back to Lawrence Taylor, WrestleMania 11, he had a crew of guys. He had his own guys to face off against the $1 Million Corporation. One of those guys was Steve McMichael. So Steve McMichael appeared during the 90s for both the WWF and WCW.
There you go.
That's the craziest thing I've probably ever heard.
Yeah. He recruited.
But yeah, okay, so boxing. Yeah, this brings up to another guy they probably paid a ton of money to do the little stuff he did. Floyd Mayweather Jr. Do you that thing with Big Show? They brought Big Show back to do this. The first time they meet, Mayweather breaks Big Show's nose for real.
And they went into it up too, like bad.
Yeah, it was bad. Well, what me about it was when they bring Floyd Mayweather in, they brought him in, they had him do the promos. They thought, WWE management thought that Mayweather was going to be the babyface.
Yeah, the arrogant, rich, prick.
They know nothing of the guy.
Beats his wife and everything.
Yeah,
he's actually, like in real life, a giant piece of shit.
And the first time he opened his mouth, they realized, oh no, we have to reverse this. Yes. Mayweather has to be the heel because no one's going to believe it otherwise.
Because he was hated by that point, he was already hated by most people.
Because there's a charisma, but again, there's stuff that you do. So they bring this guy. So yeah, they make him the heel, and they had his posse. Remember the one they had Big Show toss one of the guys like over the top rope to the outside. Yeah. I mean, they literally switch midstream, and usually in these scenarios, and I get it. Usually in scenarios, the guest star, the guest athlete, is the babyface because that translates. This was the one time, and maybe I could be wrong here, but I think it's the only time where they made a point of making this guy the bad guy because they knew it wouldn't work the other way.
Right.
So you had Mayweather, who's a world-class boxer, facing off against a man who could eat him if he chose. And Mayweather was such a piece of garbage, real or perceived, that he still came off as the bad guy.
Well, and the best part is they in that WrestleMania match, they didn't change the way that they had made the match.
Yeah.
Because he had been working this match, in training on his own. They didn't change the match. So he had the match come out like as if he was the face, like the friend handing him the things, the knuckle things. To sock him, and the chair that is supposed to be him getting the one up on the bad guy, but he's the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
The guy that 2 months ago was, in Jarrett's show, suddenly becoming a face because, well, this guy's, again, at that time, he was in court for spousal abuse. That's why he took the money, because he was in court for beating his wife that they then tried to make a good guy.
Right, yeah.
All the magazines are talking about he beat his wife. Like, no. What's happening? He's a giant piece of shit. And I don't care if somebody shows this video to him. He's a giant piece of shit. And
I will admit that. It always comes off to a lot of I'm not like I said, I don't know much about sports, but I know enough that I've heard about it, and I'm not a fan. But yeah, I just always thought that was funny the way. But speaking of human pieces of garbage that somehow had a wrestling career, let's talk about Pac-Man Jones. Do you remember that run he had in TNA?
Yes, where he wasn't even allowed to get in the ring because he was on a 1-year suspension for I want to say marijuana.
It was something to do with it was something. I think it was something happened in a nightclub and someone got shot.
Oh,
and he was an active member of the Tennessee Titans.
Yes, and he was the Titans at the time. He was on a suspension because he threw a party at a club and one of his friends shot somebody or something like that.
Yeah.
But so he makes it known that he is going to go to total nonstop action and compete. And the NFL came out and was like, no, you're not. You're still under contract. You have a contract with us. So if you get physical, you're in breach of that contract, and we'll take every dollar that we've given you away. So he came out and just stood on the ring apron.
And then with Ron Killings.
Yes, and won the tag titles.
Never used a move. Yeah, because he didn't realize. Yeah, there's one. Him and Ron Killings, aka R-Truth, won the tag titles because Ron Killings did all the work. Literally, the most physical he ever got was when he quote unquote made it rain by throwing money at his opponent, which somehow was an offensive maneuver. And then they lost the tag team titles. Again, he never literally set foot in the ring as a wrestler.
Yes.
But TNA, I can't even imagine what TNA paid him to do that. Again, good.
Well, at the time, he was probably in so many legal fees. He just said, "Pay my lawyer, and I'll show up." At this point,
oh my God, yeah.
But one of the other things too is the amount of people that have gone from football, at least football, into wrestling that are current stars is actually surprising.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of transfer that way. Like I said, maybe people that weren't necessarily famous for it, but were good enough to be pros even.
Yeah.
And then found better success in wrestling. It's those are really interesting.
Like Baron Corbin originally played for the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay, yeah.
Which I cracks me up every single time I see pictures of him because he was fat then.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I've seen some of those. And like I said, and it used to be, and I think it's more common now, but it used to be even back in the day. Yeah, there he is. That's Husky Harris almost. Doesn't it look like him?
Yeah, it does.
Like a Husky Harris twin or something. Like, damn. But yeah, there were guys. I mean, they think there's more
Roman
now.
Reigns?
Yeah, there's Roman Reigns. Yeah, I mean, hell, not a pro career, but remember The Rock. The Rock had a pretty decent college career.
He I don't think he played in the pros, but I know he played at the University of Miami.
Yeah, played for the Hurricanes.
Another one that is a big one right now is
like I said, Lex Luger he ended up playing in the CFL, but he got out. Brian Pillman was a walk-on to the university. He ended up playing for the Bengals for a bit.
Bill Goldberg.
Goldberg played for the Falcons.
Over on an Impact, Moose.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah,
played for they were the St. Louis Rams at the time, but he actually was drafted by the St. Louis Rams. Played for us for I think a couple seasons, and I remember the news stories kind of coming out that he was leaving football to become a wrestler, and I've kind of followed his career because I think he's probably one of my favorite characters with Impact Wrestling.
He's actually doing. Yeah, he's one of those guys where he's doing really well for himself where he's at. I do remember. Yeah, I vaguely remember it, people talking about him having a football career. I do remember that. Yeah, there's some transfers. There's some guys. Again, guys weren't necessarily huge in it, but then they end up transferring to wrestling and doing better for themselves. I think it's a sim, and I think it comes from football because it's a similar skill set as far as conditioning and cardio, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, I mean, it's not like you're bringing, Aaron Rodgers to,
Right.
go.
Yeah,
wrestle.
you're dealing with that. I did
Bringing
notice.
Aaron Rodgers third string quarterback because
Yeah, you're dealing
turns
with
out
guys.
he can play a good clothesline.
Right. It's a lot of guys. What I found is it's a lot of guys who it's a very particular skill set. I think it's very particular kind of like, yeah, you're not dealing with the major stars. You're not dealing with you're not dealing with the Michael Jordans of the world. You're dealing with guys who are good enough to get the pros, had a couple years, something happened, they got out. You're dealing with a lot of like alignment. I mean, there's Ron Simmons. Ron Simmons is one of only 2 jerseys at the University of Florida that are retired. Ron Simmons is one of them.
Look at them fucking arms. Jesus, Vader.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Vader, Leon White. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them have at least, even if it's just a really good, college career. And that transfers over. But again, with Vader, you're looking at Vader was never a small boy. Vader was born 25 pounds. You know what I mean? So this guy, but he was a lineman. You were dealing with big guys who transfer Lex Luger with a mustache. My God.
That is
holy crap. That is
almost like 70s pretty though. That's the weird part.
Yeah, it is very pretty. That is like wow. But yeah, like I said, Wahoo McDaniel is a good example. That guy, he played in the NFL back in the day and then transferred over to pro wrestling and did very well for himself there in the NWA. Wearing an Astros jersey. I love how every sport has just embraced Ric Flair. Like what's funny, bring him in. I love it.
Ric Flair chooses an NFL team 3 times in a season because there was like 3 different years. It was like the Panthers one year, the different teams. Whenever they start like on a big run, all of a sudden Ric Flair will show up in their locker room, and then they end up losing a Super Bowl.
I love Ric Flair.
It's actually, Ric Flair curse to have him in the locker room because nobody's had Ric Flair in their locker room and won a Super Bowl.
Speaking of, I want to. First of all, I want to thank you for coming on to this episode. We're gonna cover one more guy before we head out of here. But I want to thank you for coming on. Something About Sports' podcast. It's a really great show. Check it out. Like I said, even if you have a passive understanding of sports, watch it. It's funny. It's entertaining.
If you know nothing about sports, you'll enjoy it even more because you're like, hey, maybe I'll learn something. I hope you do.
But I want to talk about one guy. I want to talk about, and again, we're going to move away from football in this one. But I want to talk about a guy who has had a hell of a career in the sport of his choice, and actually is a Hall of Famer in pro wrestling, and has transferred over in the weirdest possible way. Pete Rose.
Oh, hell yes, go Red. He deserves to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Not a Hall of Famer for, reasons.
Bullshit.
But he's appeared multiple times only to get beaten up by Kane, which is, to me, the greatest gimmick for one guy to do. Just every year, just get the crap knocked out of him by Kane.
Put that man in the Hall of Fame.
There's one. He chokeslammed him twice and tombstoned him once. And once he was dressed as the chicken. Yes. So that to me is even funnier. He is WWF Hall of Famer. They have a celebrity wing where they brought in Pete Rose because you take that many bumps for Kane and you get in automatically. I mean, Drew Carey didn't even take one and he's in. Yeah, there's Pete Rose. Yeah, he's made a handful of appearances just to get intimidated or beat up by Kane, which I think is the weirdest post-pro career life you could probably have.
Oh, absolutely. But yes, Pete Rose is in the WWE Hall of Fame, should be in the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame, but Pro Baseball Hall of Fame doesn't like it when you make money.
That is a debate that's going to go on probably for the rest of his life. That's honest.
That's honestly going to. That's one that as a sports person, it's bullshit. Especially if they, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if they bring him in after he has passed, that would honestly be one of the biggest kind of piece of shit moves. to do to a
It's one
guy
of those.
that, let's be honest, he didn't really do. There's much worse things that baseball players have
There's
done
worse,
that
but you
are in
also
the Hall of Fame.
there's worse, but you also have to think about things like you also have to think about, not to get too far into it, but you have to think about things like the Black Sox scandal. That was a pretty big scandal, and those guys were barred again for life.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the grand scheme of things, not the worst. I mean, you've had people actively on a roster kill someone. The NFL's had people who committed murder while under contract. So in the grand scheme,
We talked about a couple weeks ago a player from the Dallas Cowboys that in a drunk driving accident killed a teammate, and they let him play that very same week. 2 days after killing a teammate in a car crash, he played in a nationally televised game to which they had a piece done about him.
right, and that's what I'm saying. So in the grand scheme of things, there's much worse that people gotten away with, and I'm not debating that. But if I think that debate with Pete Rose is going to go on, I think it'll go on. Even guys like the steroid era, Mark McGuire's, Sammy Sosa's. There's going to be a debate there. Whether they're in or not, it's a debate, but it's going to be a debate. But
he made some bets.
But to bring it back, like I said, I think Pete Rose from being the batter, the hitter that he was, to being the manager, to being barred from baseball, to getting the crap knocked out of him by Kane, to be in the WWF Hall of Fame. That is, to me, that is the weirdest post-retirement thing I've ever seen in my life. And I think it's one of the weirdest ways that sports and wrestling have interacted and collided. And to me, that just, again, that brings a little bit of a smile on my face, despite how weird it is.
Yes, and simply because even as a kid and even now, I love Pete Rose. So I hope Pete Rose makes, if they ever bring back Kane. I'm actually, when Kane gets inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, I want Pete Rose to be the one that inducts him.
Pete Rose should induct him, or they need to do some kind of gag with it. They need to do something with, they have to acknowledge it.
That would be awesome.
So again, that's going to do it for this time for the Exploder. Again, thank you, Jake, for coming on here.
Thanks for having me.
Something About Sports is a great podcast. If you're even marginally interested in sports, you don't know anything about it, you want to learn stuff, check him out. But that's going to be doing it for this time. I have, like I said before, I promoted this in other shows. I have other podcasts, not other podcasts. I have other projects. I just got done filming one. I'm not going to reveal anything yet, but it's going to be, Jake took part in it. So he's going to be in that. You're going to see him in a very new light. And when that comes out, we're going to put it online. We're working on a lot of things right now, and they'll all be made public. When they are, you can enjoy looking at this ugly mug in a different format. But until next time, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.